Hello and happy World Oceans Day, everyone. Thanks for joining us. This is Conservation in the Classroom, where you get the chance to interact with one of WWF's very own expert scientists. My name's Kate. I am going to be your host today. And before we get started, we want to welcome everyone to join in two different ways. We'd like for you to introduce yourself with your name and where you're from using that chat box that you see on your screen there. That chat box is also going to be what you use to place any questions that you have for our expert throughout the presentation. We also want to welcome you to visit that Pigeonhole website that you see on your screen and answer the word cloud question. We want to get your brains warmed up and thinking about Antarctica. So we want to know what comes to mind when you think of Antarctica. So if you haven't done so already, be sure to head over there and check it out. Okay. So I would like to introduce our featured presenter today. He is a marine scientist and is the senior manager of WWF's Antarctic program, Chris Johnson. He does a lot of cool projects down in Antarctica. Today, we get the honor to join him as he tells some really fascinating stories and shares some awesome videos and photos from his trips. So Chris, if you want to hop in and kind of say hi to everyone, and then we'll take a look at the word cloud, see what everyone had to say, and then we'll get started.
Hi, everybody. I'm Chris Johnson. I'm based in Melbourne, Australia. So I'm actually calling you in the middle of the night. It's midnight here in Melbourne, about 14 hours ahead of the East Coast. And so really excited to talk about Antarctica today to y'all.
Okay, so let us take a look at what everyone had to say came to mind when they think of Antarctica. So what do we got here? Obviously, cold is in huge letters, which means that's what most people had to say. Melting, whales, empty, penguin, ice I see on there a few times too. I think almost every single one of those topics is going to get brought up today, Chris. What do you think?
It sounds good. I think we're going to talk about everything.
All right, so without further ado, let me stop sharing my screen. Chris, if you want to take it from here, go ahead and share your screen and we'll get started.
Great. Oh, thank you. Okay, hi, everybody. Today, I want to talk to you about how awesome Antarctica is. And you touched upon a few things in the word cloud, especially cold. It is very cold in Antarctica, but it is warming up. And we'll talk a little bit about climate change in our presentation. I first wanted to talk to you about how I started in conservation, give you a little background of how I got to do this really cool job, talk about how amazing Antarctica is, what WWF is doing to help, and also how you can help. So how did I start? So about 25 years ago, I met a biologist named Roger Payne. And Roger is really famous because he, along with his wife and Scott McVeigh, discovered that humpback whales sing songs. And they did this in the 1960s. And it changed the way that we viewed whales. And he was really prominent in the whole Save the Whales movement in the 70s and the 1980s. But this is what a humpback whale song sounds like underwater. So these songs are really complex. And what's really cool about them is that they pass down from generation to generation and across different populations. And Roger was putting together an expedition called the Voyage of the ODYSSEY. And so it was a 5.5-year expedition studying whales and ocean pollution with his nonprofit, the Ocean Alliance. And if you're interested in it, you can see it on PBS. It's still online. And you can see all the stories that we did from the boat. So I was started in technology, and he asked me to come along on the expedition to help with the science, to document the expedition for the web series, but also to fix everything on the boat, all the computers and all the satellite communications gear and so forth. And we were studying sperm whales, trying to understand how whales were being affected by invisible pollution. And sperm whales are at the top of the food chain. So by understanding how pollution affected them, we could get a better understanding of the health of the world's oceans. And sperm whales are unbelievable creatures. They're what we call the elephants of the sea. They live in family groups. They're very social. They use sound to see underwater. and they're found everywhere around the world. They roam the world's oceans. So in order to study sperm whales, we actually had to travel around the world for 5.5 years. And we started in San Diego. We spent a year in the Pacific Ocean, then across the Indian Ocean for about 2.5 years. And this is where I got to drive the boat, and we went everywhere, to the Mediterranean Sea, across the Atlantic, and then we finished in Boston. And we worked in 22 countries, sailing 87,000 nautical miles. It was a pretty amazing project, and that's how I got started working with whales over 20 years ago, so very lucky. And so the past 6 years, I've been running our Antarctic program, living in Melbourne, Australia. So I'm originally from the United States. I grew up in Boston, and I married an Australian 20 years ago. And so I've been living in Melbourne ever since. And I'm a marine scientist, and I specialize in whales. And this is Antarctica. And we're going to talk a lot about the Antarctic Peninsula today. So if you didn't know about Antarctica, it's surrounded by the Southern Ocean. And Antarctica is the southernmost continent, and it's the largest wilderness on Earth. Antarctica has been established as a reserve for peace and science by the Antarctic Treaty. So it's the only place that we've done this on Earth. No one owns Antarctica, but we all govern it together. So it's a very unique place. Antarctica is about 1.5 times the size of the United States, so it's huge. The South Pole is found in Antarctica. The North Pole is in the Arctic. Believe it or not, it's the driest continent, and it's considered a desert. The coldest recorded temperature on Earth was on Antarctica, minus 128 degrees Fahrenheit. And believe it or not, several thousand people actually live and work on various research bases across Antarctica. And it's covered in ice, over a mile thick, and most of the fresh water on Earth is found in Antarctica, in the ice. Now, this is an animation of sea ice around the continent of Antarctica, and sea ice is really important because it helps regulate our global climate. It reflects heat off into space. Both the Antarctic and the Arctic do this, but it's also really important for marine life and Antarctic krill, which I'll talk a little bit about in a second. So the sea ice extends out in the wintertime and then retracts in the summertime. So I call it the heartbeat of our planet. And at WWF, we're working to safeguard a thriving wild Antarctica with a diversity of life for future generations. So we're protecting the wildlife and nature for us. And it's a really important place for all of us. And talk a little bit about why. And we do a number of different things to help conserve Antarctica. And we work with a number of different scientists who work with penguins and whales using different technologies. And today, I'd like to talk to you about an expedition that I was part of, that I want to take you along with me to study whales in Antarctica. So the way we do this is that we're going to leave from Argentina and the tip of South America in a town called Ushuaia. We're going to travel across the Drake Passage, which takes 2 days by ship. And we're going to find ourselves on the Antarctic Peninsula. To cross the Drake Passage can be really treacherous. When it's some of the roughest seas on Earth. And when you go across these rough seas, they call it the Drake Shake, because you're really shaking and rocking and rolling for a couple of days, and it can be really uncomfortable. But it is incredibly exciting. You get a lot of wildlife, believe it or not. A lot of big flying seabirds, like wandering albatross. And albatross are amazing because they're huge. Their wingspan's about the height of a basketball hoop, 3 meters. And they fly thousands of miles circling in Antarctica, basically not moving their wings, gliding the whole time on the upwellings generated from waves. And they can fly almost a year nonstop, and they're really amazing. And you see other seabirds like black-browed albatross and southern giant petrels along the way. But when we get to Antarctica, it is absolutely spectacular. And you've got these rising mountains out of the sea. You've got icebergs everywhere. It is incredibly cold, but it's spectacular. And the scale is absolutely overwhelming. So this is a little Zodiac, a little inflatable boat with 10 people on it. And you can see the mountains rising out of the sea and the glaciers that are just dominating the landscape, the icescape. So a lot of marine life, believe it or not, lives in the marine waters around Antarctica. And how many animals do you think? Just have a think about how many marine animals live in Antarctica. Well, the oceans around Antarctica are some of the most pristine in the world still, and they have over 9,000 marine species, and we're still discovering benthic species that live on the seafloor. And of course, we're going to see a lot of penguins on our expedition, and penguins live in these colonies on the ice, and we see Adeli's penguins, and they live about 20 years, and they're really robust and a bit cheeky. We'll see chinstrap penguins, gentoo penguins, and on the continent of Antarctica, we'll see emperor penguins, not so much on the peninsula, but in other places around Antarctica. And the emperor penguin is the largest penguin, about 45 inches tall, and just really special. And the biggest threat to penguins at the moment is climate change. So climate change is warming our oceans, and it's affecting their prey, tiny Antarctic krill. We'll also see seals. We'll see fur seals, whale seal, crab-eater seals, and leopard seals. And these guys are really, how sharp their teeth are. They feed on penguins, and they are very curious, and they'll pop up everywhere, and you have to be careful, but they're very inquisitive, really amazing creatures. And of course, whales. And we'll see killer whales. There are 4 different ecotypes of killer whales on Antarctica, but we're here to study humpback whales and Antarctic minke whales. So humpbacks are really cool. You'll find them on the east coast of the United States and the west coast of the United States. They're about 50 feet long, and they're similar to the length of a school bus, so they're absolutely huge. And they migrate to Antarctica to feed. So you're all living in the northern hemisphere. I live in the southern hemisphere in Australia. And so our seasons are opposite. So humpback whales breed in the winter, which is between June and September. So while you're in summer, it's winter here. And then in the summertime, they travel all the way down to Antarctica to feed in its rich waters on Antarctic krill. And they stay there and they bulk up. They feed for anywhere from 4 to 6 months. And then they travel back up to the tropics to breed and to give birth to their babies and rest. And so they don't eat while they're in the tropics. So the time in Antarctica is really important to feed on Antarctic krill. So when they're feeding in Antarctica, they're very happy. That's all I have to say. They're really happy, they're very relaxed, and they get very inquisitive. So this is a baby humpback whale having a look at our GoPro camera, which is just right under the surface of the water. And it's really cool when you see their eyes looking back at you. It's a really special experience. And humpback whales have these really unique markings on their flukes or their tails. And it's kind of like a fingerprint or your face. Everyone has a different fluke marking. So we can tell individuals by these markings and scratches on their flukes. And we're going to study Antarctic minke whales, and they are the smallest of the baleen whales. There are 2 types of whales. There are toothed whales, like killer whales that have teeth, like dolphins, and baleen whales filter on krill. And the smallest are Antarctic minke whales. They're about 24 feet in length, so they're not that small, but they're small compared to humpback whales and blue whales. And we don't know a lot about them. We know their population is increasing and they feed along the sea ice. So climate change is affecting sea ice in Antarctica. That's really important habitat for minke whales, and they live about 40 years. But we don't know their migration patterns like we do humpback whales. We know that some stay there all year round and some travel to the tropics. And all this wildlife is here primarily to feed on Antarctic krill. And it's a tiny crustacean the size of your pinky. And they're the key species in the marine food chain in the Southern Ocean for whales, seals, penguins, flying seabirds, and also fish. And when we talk about whales and krill, Antarctic blue whales are the largest animal on Earth. They're a baleen whale, so they are filter feeders, and they feed on the tiniest crustacean, Antarctic krill. And they feed in these giant swarms. And Antarctic blue whales are unbelievable. They can be up to 100 feet long, which is longer than a basketball court. And they're incredible to see in the wild. They're endangered because of whaling in the 20th century. And they're slowly coming back, but not as fast as humpback whales that have been a conservation success. So the largest animal on Earth feeds on the smallest. Climate change. Climate change is really important. You hear about climate change in the polar regions, like the Arctic. It's affecting Antarctica pretty badly. So it's affecting sea ice, which is impacting the key habitat for krill, which all marine life most of the marine life feeds off of. And this map is from February this year. It was actually the warmest day on record on the Antarctic Peninsula of 64 degrees Fahrenheit. And believe it or not, it was the same temperature as Los Angeles on that day. So this is something that we think it doesn't happen in Antarctica, but it does. Climate change is really impacting and changing the ice scape. There's something called krill fishing. So there's fishing on the Antarctic Peninsula that overlaps with key areas with whales and penguins. And also we're seeing microplastic pollution, more so on subantarctic islands. And it's something that scientists are alerting to us and that we're keeping watch on. So on our expedition, we're going to be using digital tags and drones to study whales. And these tags are really cool. They have suction cups on the bottom. The instrumentation's about the size of an iPhone, and it's in a special underwater case with 4 suction cups on it. And they stick on the back of the whale. So this is me testing the tag, and it really does stick. It took a long time to get this tag off, and then it stays on the animal for about 8 hours and pops off after a certain amount of time. But we have to wear a lot of field gear because it's so cold in Antarctica, and you can see some of the equipment that we bring with us. And we search for humpback whales and minke whales using these boats called Zodiacs. They're 15 feet long and they're inflatable. And they allow us to get to places that we can't get to on a large ship. So this is us on the Zodiac searching for humpback whales in the ice, in the snow. And it's a lot of fun to actually find them. We have to listen for their blows. And when we find them, we quietly approach them. And there's a long carbon fiber pole with a tag attached to the end of it. And we just gently place the tag in the back of a humpback whale. And that allows us to track where the whale's feeding, how it's feeding. And it has a special underwater camera on it, so we can actually record its movements and record video footage of it feeding. So this gives us really important information that we bring to policymakers to try to protect their most important areas they call home. So I'd like to show you just a 1-minute video on what it's like to be on the boat tagging with us. And this is a video of us tagging for the first time an Antarctic minke whale a couple years ago. And some of the footage is from the tag itself.
Of that kind that we've ever put on a minke whale.
Dude.
There are so many unknowns with these animals. We know that they associate with sea ice, but we really know nothing about their behavior underwater.
The new technologies that are emerging in whale research are just so exciting. And we need to get these technologies feeding data to policymakers as soon as we can.
So all those cheering people, we were actually on a tourism ship, and about 100 people watched us put a tag on the animal. So it was really exciting to hear everybody cheering when we did that. And obviously we get really cool shots underwater, but we also get these great whale selfies too. from the boat when the whale comes up and takes a picture of the research team. So we also use drones to study whales from above. We can study their health by taking pictures of their body as they're growing fat over the summer, filling up with krill, to build up energy for those long journeys back to the breeding grounds. And this is just some footage of humpback whales feeding, and a technique that they use called bubble net feeding. What they do is they dive below a swarm of krill. They start blowing bubbles in circles around the swarm, and it drives them to the surface. And then they come up and open their mouths and take a big gulp of Antarctic krill. And it's absolutely spectacular to see from the drones. And drones are changing the way we really understand how humpbacks are feeding and where they're feeding. It's pretty amazing technology. And we take all this information, working with our science team, working with Ari and Dave. We create reports for governments. The orange areas are important areas for feeding for humpback whales and minke whales. And we advocate to protect these areas, to create marine protected areas, or ocean parks. So bringing this science to government is really important. So I'll spend time in the field, and then I'll work with scientists to create these reports, and then I'll put a suit and tie on and go to these government meetings around the world with a whole bunch of other team from all offices, from the United States to China to Australia to Argentina to Chile, and we're all working together to protect Antarctica. And we're working to protect 30% of the Southern Ocean. That's about the size of the United States that we're trying to create these marine parks. And the good news is that governments have already committed to this about 10 years ago. So they have implemented a couple so far, including the Ross Sea Marine Protected Area, which is the largest MPA on Earth. And these areas are really important for protecting wildlife as climate is changing and impacting Antarctica. So to protect Antarctica, it actually takes all of us to do this. No one owns Antarctica, we all own it. We all manage it. It's everybody's special place. And it takes a lot of scientists, it takes a lot of people in conservation, in industry, and governments, and including yourselves to help protect Antarctica and the amazing wildlife that it calls it home. And our actions affect the entire planet, and including Antarctica. So because climate change is affecting Antarctica, you can actually take action at home to help Antarctica. And this is my daughter, Lily, at the Climate March in Melbourne last year. And she's a real passionate young student that just cares about changing the way our government is dealing with climate change in Australia. And there are a few things that we want you to take home that you can help too. So everything from reducing your energy use, unplugging, to reducing the amount of food and water you waste, to writing to your local politicians about how you feel and how you care about places like Antarctica and how climate change is impacting it. And then spread the word to your family and friends. It's really important. Lily does this. She talks about climate change with her grandparents. She's passionate about this, and she doesn't want climate to impact her future. She wants to see a thriving ocean. And I think on World Oceans Day, it's something we can all think about and talk about together. So thank you very much, and look forward to answering the questions that you all have.
Okay, thank you so much, Chris. I think all of us want to go with you to study whales now, at least I do. Before we get started here, if you want to go ahead and, there you go, stop sharing, and then I will just remind everyone really quickly that we have 2 other questions for you guys to answer on our Pigeonhole. So head back over to that Pigeonhole site, use the passcode WHALE, and you're going to see a set of poll questions that we'd like you to participate in. Also, please, please, please put any questions that you have for Chris in the chat. We're going to get started with our Q&A here in just a second. So any questions you may have about Antarctica or any of the species that he talked about, please put them in the chat. And once we are done the Q&A, we will head back over to Pigeonhole and see what everyone had to say. All right, Chris, are you ready for your first question?
Yeah, go for it.
Okay. Our first question here says, how many pounds do sperm whales eat per day? So
Oh.
maybe that's a very specific question, but
Very
if you know
specific
like an
question.
average of maybe any of the whales you talked about, how much they eat a day.
Yeah, so that's a great question. So with sperm whales, they eat giant squid, believe it or not, and they dive really deep, up to 2,500 meters in depth sometimes, and they feed anywhere from they stay underwater for anywhere from 30 minutes to an hour and a half, feeding on giant squid all day long, and they do these dives over and over, and they spend about 70% of their time underwater feeding. I'm not sure how much they take per day, but it's quite a bit when they can. So they're just these constant foragers. So with humpback whales, we are estimating between anywhere from 1 to 1.5 tons of krill per day. So it's a huge amount that they have to feed on to bulk up. And what's really exciting is, humpback whales, they're one of our biggest conservation success stories of the 20th century, and their populations are rebounding. So protecting places like the Antarctic Peninsula and other key areas in Antarctica are really important for the humpback whale populations to bounce back. So I hope that answers some of your questions.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. You got to figure, like you mentioned, with especially blue whales being the biggest animal, eating the smallest animal that exists, I'd imagine that it'd have to be a lot either way.
There's a lot of krill.
Let's see, Rocket would like to know, are all countries part of the Antarctic Treaty?
No, they're not. So to be part of the Antarctic Treaty, you have to have an Antarctic base on the continent. And at the moment, I think it's a little over 40 countries are part of the Antarctic Treaty. It was started in 1959, and it was started by the United States and Russia. And so the Antarctic Treaty, when you go, they speak 4 languages. So it's in English and Spanish, French, and Russian. But it's grown since then. And where we implement MPAs is called the Southern Ocean Commission, or CAMLAR, and there are about 26 countries part of that. So,
okay, that was a great question. Next up is a question from Pup that would like to know, how many species of whales are there? It's kind of two-parter here. He also wants to know, how loud is a blue whale underwater?
Okay, so there are about 82 to 83 species. We're always discovering new species, especially beaked whales. They're whales that live offshore that we are learning more and more about as we study our oceans. Blue whales, how loud are they? Their vocalizations are very, very loud. They can be as loud as a jet engine. And it's been theorized and proved that blue whales can communicate hundreds of miles across ocean basins. So their sounds are very low. You can't hear them because they're very low frequency. So human hearing can't hear them. We have to speed it up to be able to bring up the frequency to hear a blue whale vocalization. But they're so powerful, they can travel hundreds of miles, which is pretty amazing.
That's really interesting. I never knew that humans actually wouldn't be able to hear it. That's fascinating. Abby would like to know, how cold is the water?
Well, it's near freezing. So it's about 0 degrees Celsius, 32 degrees Fahrenheit. So it's always about that temperature around Antarctica. And we've got different types of sea ice that emerge in different places based on different conditions of the water. So cold. It is very cold. You don't want to fall in.
I was going to say, have you or any of your crew members ever fallen in?
No, but we have to bring a lot of safety gear, especially on the Zodiacs, because when we're searching for whales in the small boats, we can go anywhere from a few miles to 30 to 40 miles away from the ship. And because of that, we have to, if we fall in the water, we have all these layers on and special gear that we can survive if we do fall in the water. But if we do, you can get very cold very quickly, and that's probably the most dangerous thing is falling in the water and getting hypothermia. So it's something we have all these drills and equipment and gear to deal with.
Let's hope that doesn't happen.
No.
All right, Ariana would like to know, how much is global warming affecting the animals in Antarctica and Antarctica itself? I know you kind of touched on this a little bit, but if you want to just revisit it.
Yeah, it's affecting the animals in different places in different ways. So in West Antarctica, which includes the Antarctic Peninsula, the temperature is warmed by about 5 degrees Fahrenheit. So that's impacting the ocean. So the ocean's warming, and that's causing glaciers to recede. So on the Antarctic Peninsula, about I think 88% of all the glaciers are receding or losing ice. And there's some big glaciers that we're studying at the moment that we're a little concerned about that can add to sea level rise. So in the west, it's warming. In the east, it's cooling a bit. There's this phenomenon of cooling in the east. So there's actually, it's increasing in sea ice. But overall, Antarctica is losing ice. And there's a stat, in the past 4 years, Antarctica has lost more sea ice than the Arctic has in 34 years. So it's losing ice fast as a whole because of climate change. But ocean warming is impacting the habitat for krill. And that's what we're really concerned about. We're working really hard. We do a lot of work on krill because we want to make sure that all this amazing wildlife can feed on krill, basically. So by protecting key areas of krill, we're going to protect a lot of key areas for penguins, whales, and seals.
So krill is a very important animal here.
Really super important animal.
Okay, Orca Boy 46 would like to know, have you ever seen a killer whale?
Yes, have seen lots of killer whales, and they're pretty amazing. And they, one ecotype of killer whales feed on seals in Antarctica, and so they're hunting for seals, and it's pretty. I've witnessed it, but I've had researcher friends who've documented it, and it's pretty amazing. But they are.
I'm sure that's a sight. That's a sight to
see. It is a sight, but they're incredibly smart. Very. They're incredible creatures.
Okay, we have another question from Ariana. She'd like to know, when we think of animals in Antarctica, we usually think of whales, penguins, polar bears, and seals. Are there any other animals that we should think about?
Well, polar bears are only in the north, so they're only in the Arctic, and penguins are only in the Antarctic, where I work. So there's a lot of different flying seabirds in Antarctica, and there's one seabird in particular, the Arctic tern, that actually does the longest migration on Earth. It goes from the Arctic to Antarctica and back, which is pretty amazing. They're very tiny. They're the size of my hand, so they're quite cool to see. And they're Arctic terns as well. So there's just a huge diversity of life, and there's also life on the seafloor. We call it benthic ecology or benthic habitats, where we're discovering more about the species living in the seafloor, corals and so forth. So it's a very special place.
And who knows what we haven't even discovered yet that's living down there, right. I'm sure. Let's see. We got another good question here from Ari Louise, who wants to know what happens to the tags after they fall off the whales.
Yep. So we do use two types of tags. The suction cup tags, what they do is they pop off after 8. We put a timer on them, so they pop off after 8 hours. They can stay on for 24 hours, up to 48 hours if we need to. But we have to retrieve it, and it has a special beacon on it where we can track it. But we have to go find it and pick it up. So we usually wait overnight and then wake up the next morning and have a special tracker. And then we're searching for it in the ice, and we pick it up, and then the researchers download the data from it and then analyze it. So it's pretty cool. We can reuse that tag over and over. There's other technology called satellite tags, which stay in the animals for anywhere from a month, and that tracks the long distance migrations. And those are really important because that tells us where those key areas are to feed, but we only use a limited number of those. And we don't retrieve those.
Got it. Okay, Tristan would like to know, how can we get the government to listen about whales?
That's a great question. That's something you can help us with. We need lots of people talking to their local government and national government and their families and friends about the really cool wildlife in Antarctica and how they can protect them. And by creating these marine protected areas or national parks on the ocean, that will help a lot of wildlife, including whales. And that's something we work really hard at WWF to implement, along with other partners and other NGOs as well.
Our next question comes from James. He would like to know, what did you study to work in this specialty?
That's a great question. So I started in technology. So I was a programmer when I got started and asked to be on that expedition, just because I knew tech and computers, and I could do things like film and do a whole range of stuff. You have to be able to do a lot of different types of things and have a really good attitude about wanting to learn. But I've got a master's in science and I'm doing a PhD now. You can get involved in this in so many different ways. There's no direct pathway to study whales, but it's finding the right people and just working really hard through your career to just do what you're passionate about. And this is kind of an accidental career for me.
So that would kind of be your advice to anyone that is interested in maybe having a similar career as you one day. What would be the big takeaway that you would tell everyone?
I think it's just studying really hard in school. I know that sounds pretty cheesy, but it really does. It can take you a long way, and people do. There are lots of different skills to be either a scientist or naturalist, or to work in the field, or to work doing policy. There's lots of different jobs around conservation that you can be a lawyer, you can do be in technology, you can specialize in math and physics, you can just love being with animals and work in the outdoors. Being a boat captain is really important. So there's a lot of different ways you can do it.
That's not cheesy at all, Chris. That's great advice. Our next question is from Offshore Innovations. Wants to know, what's your personal favorite whale species?
My favorite whale species, I'd say sperm whales, but just because I spent 5.5 years working with them at sea and in probably some of the most parts of the Pacific and Indian Ocean, and seeing things that people don't get to see. So that's probably my favorite species.
Can I ask, why do sperm whales breathe the way they do?
They breach? That's a good question.
How do don't they sleep like vertical?
Oh, they sleep. Yeah, we're learning that they sleep like kind of upside down and rest between their foraging dives or feeding dives. But also when they socialize, they line up in a row, side by side, and then travel in one direction together, which is really cool to see.
Like kids at recess.
Yeah.
Okay, Batch Z would like to know, how much force does it take to put the tags on?
Not very much, because it's at the end of this long pole. It's about 8 to 9 feet long. It's very lightweight. It's only a couple pounds, and you really just move it in position and you just tap it on the back of the animal, and the suction cups really do stick. They're very sticky. So. Not much force at all. And we record information on how whales react to that as well as part of our permits, because we have special permits to do this work as well. Not everybody can do the work, and there's a lot of reporting that we have to do with the science.
Does it seem like the whale feels it? I know in the video, as soon as you see the tag go on it, you see it kind of move a little. So it must feel something, right?
It depends if they're sleeping. Or they're resting. It just depends. Most of the time we don't see a reaction. Sometimes we'll see a reaction, but it doesn't hurt the animals because it's temporary, and it's just basically just sticking on their back, and they've got really thick layers of blubber, and it's more the kind of the surprise.
If you
I think of it, yeah, exactly. It's like, hey, what's that?
Yeah.
But
okay, Poppy would like to know what happens. Oh, we already kind of covered that. What happens to the cameras when they fall off the whales? I know you kind of touched on that already. Silas wants to know, does the tag have to be facing a certain way on the whale? That's a good question.
At the moment, there's different cameras where there's cameras on the front and the back, so we can get two perspectives. There's a camera that they do now 360 video on the top of the tag, so you get a perspective all around the animal, but sometimes it can slip down on the side and we get different perspectives of it feeding too. So it just depends.
I like this next question by Dara. Would like to know, how long are your trips and what food do you take?
Well, we work a lot with tourism boats. So we get berths on tourism vessels that are going down for a couple weeks at a time. And so we're eating really, really well. And so we'll have, you know, a lot of different types of food. But what happens is when the tourists go off the ship and are looking at penguins or whales, we have a Zodiac and we do our thing usually in the morning and in the afternoon for about anywhere, 6 to 7 hours. But then what's really cool about that is we can come back to the ship and we tell people and show them video and do talks to tourists about what we've seen, how we do it, and share that experience with them as we're studying whales, which is really cool.
I love that question, like wanting to know what would you pack in terms of food? Okay, Sawyer would like to know, how do the orca whales communicate if not by song?
So baleen whales, like humpback whales, will sing songs, and they're very unique in doing that. Killer whales, they echolocate. So killer whales, sperm whales, dolphins all echolocate, and orcas use clicks and whistles to communicate, like dolphins. So they're basically big dolphins. And so echolocation is it's like a biosonar. They use it to see. So they use it to communicate, and they use it to find their prey and see underwater.
Okay, it looks like we have just a couple questions left here. Another one from Ariana. How many layers of clothes do you have to have on when you're in Antarctica?
A lot. So if it's really bad, if it's really bad weather, I usually have 4 layers of clothes. So we have long underwear and a couple different types of fleece, both on your pants and on your tops. And then we have special windproof and waterproof gear. And you saw in the last picture, I bring ski goggles as well, because we're in the Zodiac, we're going really fast. And so your tears can freeze and you get a lot of snow and ice freezing on your face. So you have to wear ski goggles when we're underway in the Zodiac. So, and usually a couple different hats and a couple pairs of gloves and so forth. So a lot of stuff. It takes about 10 minutes to get dressed.
Yikes.
Yeah.
Our next question from James. Do you interact with the whales? Like, do you pet them?
No, we're not. We're supposed to be really careful around whales. We have, with our special permits, it limits us from doing certain things. It allows us to approach the animals to study them. So we usually have to approach them using certain methods. And we usually don't, can only approach them a couple times. So we don't want to harass the animals or cause, be in the vicinity too long. So we try to do our work and then leave as soon as we can. So we really take a lot of great care that we don't disturb the animals.
Right. Okay, our next question comes from 1B. They kind of had 2 questions here. The first question is, how many penguin species live in Antarctica? So we'll start with that one, and then I'll send you the next one after that.
No, I knew someone asked the penguin species. So on the continent, so overall there's 17 species of penguins, but on the continent, only 2, only Adelie penguins and emperor penguins. But we find gentoo and chinstraps on the peninsula, on the islands, so the South Shetland Islands, and some of the Antarctic Peninsula islands.
Okay, so the second half of their question, this is a good one. Do the bright color of the tags scare off the krill?
I don't know. I don't think it does, but I don't think we've ever tested that. It's really easy for us to see it and pick it up in the ice. So, but I don't think it scares off the krill.
Okay, we'll ask one last question for you here, Chris. What's next? What projects do you have coming up, or that you're really excited about, or what kind of work would you love to see happen with whales or penguins or any of the above in Antarctica?
Well, we're working really hard to try to get the Marine Protected Area network on the Antarctic Peninsula and East Antarctica and the Weddell Sea. So that's what we'll be working on, especially over the next year. And then after that, we'll be going back to Antarctica, I think in 2022, and doing more work with whales. So we're going to be going out with some of our supporters and doing these trips together which will be a lot of fun. So we're going to continue this work until we can actually get these marine protected areas in Antarctica.
Awesome. Well, we'd love to have you back if you'll have us, if we
Oh,
can
definitely.
arrange time zones again, right?
Oh,
Okay,
thanks.
before we sign off for the day, let's take a look back at our pigeonhole question to see what you guys had to say. We asked which of the Antarctic animals that Chris talked about today would you like to study most? So we mentioned seabirds like albatross, penguins, seals, and whales. So there you have your results. Chris, it looks like you may have some future whale scientists
Awesome.
joining you here as our most popular answer. And then the other question we asked you guys was what action you would commit to in order to help protect our oceans. So there are the results there. I like to see that a lot of people chose more than one answer, which is awesome. So reducing your energy and reducing the amount of food and water you waste were the top two answers, both very easy to do every day while you're at home. So thanks everyone for participating in those questions. Thanks for watching. Thanks for asking questions for Chris. This was awesome. Chris, thanks so much for joining us. I know it's really late where you are, so we really appreciate you hopping on and sharing about some of the really great work that you're doing down in Antarctica. And like I said, we'd love to have you back one day for an update on all your projects. Teachers and parents, don't forget we have a lot of other ocean learning materials available over on Wild Classroom. And if any of you have questions for Chris that we didn't have time to answer today, you can always email them over to wildclassroom@wwfus.org, and we'd be happy to pass them along to him and get some answers back to you. So happy World Oceans Day, everyone. Have a great day. We'll see you next time.